Buenas tardes. Lo siento, hablo español muy malamente. So it is better if I speak in English. Please forgive me. You are celebrating 35 years of digital and distance learning, and you are right to celebrate this. In my view, Tec de Monterrey is a world leader, if not the world leader, in digital learning at this very moment. And that's because of that 35 years or more experience that you've had. So it's a great honor for me to be here today. I decided to talk a little bit about the past, a little bit about the present, and a little bit about the future. So, first of all, I'm going to give a brief outline of the history of digital and distance learning, particularly focusing on technology and teaching methods, which have developed in parallel and sometimes together. I'm going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 and where we are today, and I'm going to talk about the future, the impact of particularly artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies. And then I'm going to have some conclusions about what I see as the main lessons that we've learned as a result of this. So part one, the past. Easy for me to talk about the past because I've lived through it. Not quite from the very beginning. In the 19th century, about 1856 I think it was, the University of London started offering an external degree. Anybody could take it. No prior qualifications. This was 1856. It was a long time ago. And it was mainly aimed at people in the British Empire so that they could take a degree from Britain, even though they weren't living there. And I actually tutored on this program back in 1970-something. So it's correspondence education. All you got was a curriculum, a list of topics, a reading list, and then you did written exams, and they were marked, and you eventually went on to earn a degree that way. Very hard way of doing it. Then in 1969, the British government set up the UK Open University, which was based on print and a mix of television and radio programs made by the British Broadcasting Company, the BBC. And very important, something that nobody really talks about, because everybody knows about the print and the TV, was a systems-based approach to learning. They brought instructional designers and systems thinkers over from the US to help combine faculty, TV producers, instructional designers, web designers, and so on, all together in a team to work together, a team approach to teaching. And that was a very significant advance because it resulted in very high quality distance education teaching materials and programs. Now, parallel with this, the correspondence schools were still going as private correspondence schools. But as a result of the British Open University, a number of open universities around the world opened, such as in the Open University of Hong Kong, the Open University of Indonesia. There were many Open University of Pakistan. And so there's now about 60 national open universities around the world. And up to 1982, there was an annual conference for distance education, but it had been run primarily by the private correspondence schools. And in 1982, incidentally, that conference was in Vancouver, and I was there. They actually changed the name from the International Council for Correspondence Education to the International Council for Distance Education, to make that distinction that it was more than just correspondence. In 1985, the internet arrived. And I'll give you my first contact with the internet. I was, again, in Vancouver at a conference. I was still living in England. And a Canadian colleague said to me, "Come down to my basement." Now, I didn't know him that very well, so I was a little bit nervous. And I go down, And he says, look at this. And he had a microcomputer, I think it was a Dell or something, and he had this black box which was plugged into his into his telephone. And he said, that's a modem. He says, now I'm going to call up a list of people, and up came a list. This was an email address list, basically, and said, I'm going to click on one of these and see if anybody responds. So he sent a message, are you out there? And back came this message, yes, where are you? I'm in New York. And we had a little chat, what's the weather like, and so on. And I said, ask him how old he is. Now, this was about 10 o'clock at night in Vancouver. Must have been 1 o'clock in New York. And he says, I'm 12 years old. That was my introduction to the internet. In 1995, the Apple Mac came along, and that was the first easy-to-use microcomputer. You didn't have to write programming like you did until that time, and that was enabled by the development of word processing, which enabled you to type directly into a computer, and the computer would show the actual writing up on the screen. Up to that point, it was all code. Then that led eventually in 1989 to electronic publishing. And also in 1989, Tech de Monterrey connected to the internet for the first time and also was running satellite TV programs. So 89 was a very significant year. It was also the year I moved to Canada. Then in 1991 came the World Wide Web. There was not an easy way to put material up onto the internet until the World Wide Web came. We take all these things for granted now, but people were learning all the time how to do this. In 1996, I was fortunate enough to be at UBC working as a distance education manager, managing the distance education program, and the provost called me and said, we've got a very bright young mathematics teacher who's wants a little bit of money to keep a graduate student working over the summer. And I had the funds for developing distance education. And I said, well, that's computer software. Why do you want me to give him money? He said, well, I think you'll find it very useful. So I went to talk to him. It was Murray Goldberg. And he had developed the first learning management system called WebCT. And he needed somebody over the summer to get it up into a user-friendly way. And we went on to use WebCT. But before then, you had to post things as documents on the internet, as WordPerfect documents. And it was difficult to print, too, because you had to actually connect everything together to do the printing. So as a result of those developments, all that technology enabled us to start offering fully online courses. And in 1996, this was after NAFTA, just after NAFTA, and there was a lot of talk about Canada and the US and Mexico working together and so on, and somebody, I don't know, he came from Tech de Monterrey, approached me at UBC and said, we would like a partnership. I think you'd got a grant from the federal government to train teachers in educational technology. And they approached me because I'd written a book on online learning and so on, and somebody from Tech de Monterrey had translated it. So I ended up working with Pepe Escamilla de los Santos, and we developed a partnership between UBC and Tech de Monterrey. We would create the materials, do the design, and Pepe would and his team, and I think there's somebody here, Veronica's here from that team, took the materials and converted them into Spanish and delivered them and tutored the courses in Spain, and we delivered the programs in English, in fact, around the world. Now, at UBC, that's now a full Masters of Education Technology. That program is still running. It's been running for 25 years now, over 25 years. It's had over 1,000 graduates, and from over 100 different countries. Fully online. It was the first fully online program at UBC, and it's been a huge success. It's self-recovering in fees. Students pay the same fee for the online program as they do for an online graduate program at UBC, and it's enabled the hiring of 10 extra full-time research professors in the Faculty of Education out of that program. Well, let's move on a little bit now to the period 1997 to 2019. Because of this shift in technology, previously you need to have a very big, expensive course team to develop a distance education program like the British Open University. But the learning management system allowed an individual faculty member to more or less create their own course because it provided a kind of template for them. So what happened was that conventional universities started with campus-based universities, started offering low-cost, online, text-based programs. Now, mostly these were additional programs added on to the undergraduate program. At UBC, they were usually taken by students who had not managed to complete in 4 years, and rather than come back for another year, they could take an extra courses as distance education courses. That was because our programs are full, and because of the, what do they call it, the ranking system, we had to keep our class sizes down in 3rd and 4th year, so students were taking longer to graduate. Thank you, the ranking systems, for that. In 1999 to 2003, as I said, the first fully online programs, both in Canada and in Mexico. And these were asynchronous, anytime, any place, via a learning management system. Although I have to be careful here, asynchronous doesn't mean to say that students could study independently anytime they wanted. They had to meet a schedule, but within that schedule, they had the flexibility of logging in at any time. So there were no set lectures or anything. There was no Zoom. Then you may remember there was the tech boom and bust around 2000. And private universities in the US, like New York University, were setting up New York University Online for profit, separate from the on-campus programs, because they were still not convinced that online learning was as good as their on-campus programs. They didn't last very long because they couldn't develop a good business model. And that was something similar to what happened with MOOCs. MOOCs are still around, they're still very useful, but it's been difficult to find a sustainable business model for them. Then we come to 2019, and we know what happened then. We had COVID. And the impact of COVID on online and distance education is quite significant. Up to 2019, we do a survey in Canada of the use of online learning across all the universities and colleges in Canada. We do it once a year. And up to 2019, the main tool for distance education was the learning management system. Everybody who was using online learning was using a learning management system. And some were beginning to use some kind of video conferencing. When COVID came, everybody switched over immediately to Zoom for obvious reasons. It was an emergency. It wasn't just a few keen, enthusiastic minority of the faculty who were teaching online. It was everybody. And within a week or two, you could not train everybody to become good online teachers. So Zoom was very user-friendly, very easy for faculty to use, and everything became Zoom. So we went from asynchronous learning design models of online learning to synchronous lecture-type programs because of the COVID. So this was a step for me back in pedagogical design. This was not designed for online learners. What we'd done up to 2019 was to look at the context in which a student works online, in isolation, probably working full-time, and designed our courses to fit those students. Zoom does not do that. It can be a help, but it's not a substitute for that kind of design. But it did lead to a wider recognition amongst faculty particularly that maybe I don't want to do everything online, but I can do some things online. So that brings us to the present. And there's a dotted line here, if I can use this. There we go. See this dotted line? This is actual data before 2020. This is the number of students in Canada taking at least one online course or a blended course. The blue is blended, the red is fully online. And then in 2021, coming towards the end of COVID, we sent a questionnaire out asking institutions, would they be reducing their online teaching, increasing it, and the same for blended learning. And that's the result we got. So it looks like after COVID, the majority of universities in Canada and colleges were saying it's going to be a digital world. There's going to be very few fully face-to-face courses with no digital learning. But of course, that will happen gradually. We now have some more or less agreed definitions in US and Canada around this development. And I'll not go through the details of that, but we found that there was sort of 85% agreement amongst institutions across US and Canada on these definitions between what's the difference between online learning, hybrid learning, high flex learning. I'm sure you have similar terms in Spanish for this, but the interesting thing is that there's a lot of agreement now about these terms in North America. One of the problems was that people were using terms that we didn't know what they meant. This is really important that we have clear definitions because students need to know, how often do I need to come to the campus? Is this a course that's going to require me to come once a week, 3 times a week, or do I have to come to campus at all? And can I choose how I come? Can I decide 1 week I'll come and the next week I don't? I can still study digitally if I don't come that week. So it's really important that students are communicated as to what kind of course it is and how much of it is digital and how much is face-to-face and what the requirement for face-to-face is. And this is a nightmare for administrators, particularly for the people who design the lecture, the classroom timetabling, because if you have different faculty all wanting different times, it becomes really difficult. Maybe AI can help with that. And we've seen some emerging technologies coming up in the last few years. Simulations have been around for a long time, but they've got cheaper and easier to do. University I work with called Ryerson University, now called Toronto Metropolitan, has a team there that has a design model for serious games, for simulations and serious games. It's a very good, it's very similar to the kind of decision model in terms of a model that you have for deciding on what courses should be blended online or fully face-to-face. We've seen the introduction of augmented and virtual reality. Now, I make a distinction here between general technologies that can be used right across the university, like Zoom or learning management system, and those technologies that appear at first sight to be more useful in some areas than others. So augmented and virtual reality, there are certain topics or subjects that it really lends itself to, but it's not really practical in terms of cost to have every student right through the university using these technologies. Maybe when the cost comes down, that might be a reality. But these emerging technologies need to be used more in a more focused way. And then we have artificial intelligence. Well, I'll say a little bit more about that. And of course, all along we've had social media, and that to some extent has been integrated in some instructors' teaching, but not in others. So as I said, there are core technologies like video conferencing and learning management systems. And there are also core pedagogies, different pedagogies. There's synchronous lecturing, and that doesn't have to be face-to-face. It can be online, but it's synchronous lecturing. There's what I call online learning design, which is designed for asynchronous learning. And then you have a hybrid or blended learning model, which is the combination. But they all have somewhat different learning theories or design preferences in doing them well. Now, like everything, like people often say to me, is online learning better than face-to-face teaching, or it's not better? Well, my answer to that is you can teach well online or badly, or you can teach well face-to-face or badly face-to-face. It's nothing to do with the delivery method, it's to do with the quality of the teaching. And that is more or less independent of the mode of delivery. The other challenge of moving to a digital model is classroom space and how it's used. Now, here's a big question. I've been here for, less than a day, but I notice you haven't finished building your university yet. You're still building it. And it's exactly the same at UBC. I've been going up there for 35 years now, and every time I get lost because they've got new buildings, and pathways that used to exist don't. Now, here's a big question. Should you be putting that money into new buildings, or should you be looking at your existing buildings and saying, these are not suitable for a blended learning model, when we've got students wanting to bring their work they do digitally at home into the classroom and have it discussed and so on. This is, what you can see here is what they call an interactive classroom at Queen's University in Canada. You see the instructor stands at a pod, a little bit like Captain Kirk in Star Trek, and the students have tables that are plugged in to screens around, so they can post, each table can post their own work up, and the instructor can teach the class as a whole, or she can get students to present their work individually. And the other thing you can't see there is there are individual study carrels where students can go off and do a bit of work on their own and come back and bring it to the class. Now, the significant thing about that, they said, is it's like Winston Churchill said, our buildings, we make our buildings, but our buildings make us. You put a teacher into that classroom, her teaching methods change immediately. Without any training, without any instruction, just by having a classroom like that, it immediately appeals to a different way of teaching for that instructor. So we need to look very carefully at what we've got and whether we are better building new buildings for teaching or reconfiguring the ones we've got. And we also need better models for making decisions about what kind of courses we're going to offer. And here again, Tech de Monterrey is ahead of anybody. I haven't seen anybody else in the world that has a decision model for deciding on what should be, what combination of digital and face-to-face a course should have. And you've got that. And I don't know how well it's worked. You will know how well it's worked in your institution. But we need those kinds of models, because at the moment, it's just guesswork. An individual instructor say, oh, I'll do a bit of online teaching. And you hope to God he's got it right, because there's no way of checking whether that's the right way to go. So that's the present, that's easy. What about the future? Well, as they say, it's very hard to predict, especially the future. So let's start with artificial intelligence. Perhaps I should have put que sera rather than Latin, quo vadis. Where's it going? Well, first of all, who knows the future? But technology doesn't appear out of nowhere. If you look at that history, things were happening in parallel, and they weren't always ready, but you could see the direction in which things were going. So I think we can look towards the next 5 to 10 years. We can see how the technology is likely to emerge. What we can't do really is predict what's going to happen beyond that, because who knows? But let me deal first of all with artificial intelligence, and particularly one form of artificial intelligence that's been causing a lot of concern recently, and that's large language models. Now, let me say that I had been working as a consultant until March last year. And when I got to my birthday, I was 85 in April the 14th, and I decided I was going to stop working. Now, why did I decide that? I've been working quite happily up till 85. It was because of artificial intelligence. And the reason I decided to stop was I could not be a consultant in online and digital learning unless I really understood deeply how artificial intelligence works. And I thought, I'm 85 years old, I've got a decision to make now. Do I want to learn advanced mathematics or do I want to play golf? And it wasn't a difficult decision. So let me say right away, I'm not an expert in artificial intelligence. But let's look first of all at the Gartner hype cycle for new technologies. This applies pretty well to most technologies. When they come in, there's a tremendous amount of enthusiasm, a peak of inflated expectations. People think it's going to solve all the world's problems. Then as people start using it and finding out its limitations, you get a trough of disillusionment. But then you get to a point where people say, well, wait a minute, it is useful for some things. We can do these things with it. In fact, it's a lot better than what we had before. And then you gradually get up to the plateau of productivity. Now, I think we're at the peak of inflated expectations with artificial intelligence at the moment. Incidentally, we were doing artificial intelligence in the 1980s, and it was computer-assisted learning and so on. But this new, large language models like ChatGPT, they are a big step forward in terms of artificial intelligence. So what's the likely plateau of productivity of these tools? Well, ChatGPT is very good. It answers questions by searching the whole internet, and it is non-discriminatory. You can build in to the model, if you write the algorithms properly, some discrimination. You might give higher weights to academic papers and lower weights to Donald Trump's statements. But it actually doesn't do that in most cases. It looks at everything out there on the internet, including people's stupidity in Facebook and so on. And it works out the most likely sequence of words in a sentence. So if you give it 3 words, it will try and guess what the next word would be. So it statistically selects the most appropriate response from billions of different possibilities. And then they use testing on humans to find out if it's making really bad mistakes. And then they correct the algorithms to try to prevent that, and then they release it as a product. And in fact, they carry on continuing to test it, actually. And so that's basically the way that a large language model works. Now, what are the benefits of it for education? First of all, it is comprehensive in covering the whole internet. It's it has basically a huge database to draw on. It is excellent for summarizing a topic, depending on how you ask the question. Now, asking the question is critical. So I'll give you an example in a minute. It doesn't make a judgment. It will just tell you what people have said in the past. In fact, if you ask what is best, it will often say, I am a computer program. I do not have an opinion on this. It's up to you, as the person who asks the question, to make a judgment about the information it gives you. Now, I actually use ChatGPT on my own website. I've got over 3,000 articles on online and distance learning. And if I can use the technology, you see it says search my site using AI. Okay, this is what, if you click on that, this is what you get. And I put in what are the advantages and disadvantages of online learning. And this is the answer it gave me. It goes on and on. And I've summarized what it said here. There's the advantages of online learning, and there are the disadvantages. And it's pretty damn good. It tells us what we've learned in the past about the advantages and disadvantages of online learning. But there are problems. The biggest problem is the lack of transparency. You cannot get in to see the algorithms. You cannot see how the decisions have been made about what data to include and what to exclude, mainly because the algorithms are protected by patents. So unless you're very special, you can't get in and judge what is the mathematical basis for these answers. Only the people who've written it and tested it actually know that. And secondly, it's backward looking. It looks at what has already been discussed or recorded over the internet. And at the moment, it only goes up to 2 years from 2 years past. So it doesn't include what's happened in the last 2 years. That will get better. They'll get it faster and faster. But it's looking backwards. What's been said and done before. It's incredibly mechanistic. It's probability-based. There's no machine thinking going on here. It's just churning numbers and coming up with a probable sequence of sentences. So when you get what it looks like somebody has written it and thought about it and analyzed it, but it's just probabilities. So it's not good for new ideas or creativity. It's good for instance, in law, you have case law, you have lots of laws, and you want them summarized. It's really great for doing that. But if you want to create new law, it's not going to help you very much, other than telling you what the law is up to the time, which is very useful, of course. So if we look at what's called Bloom's taxonomy of learning, these are the lower levels of learning, remembering and understanding. But what we want from our university graduates, at any rate, is these higher levels of applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. And at the moment, and I'm very careful to say this, large language models aren't very good for those top 3 or 4 kinds of learning or kinds of thinking. Now, there's no reason why they can't be. At the moment, it's purely mathematical probability. If they start building algorithms based on cognitive psychology, about what we know about how people learn, then they could become really powerful and really scary. But that's not happening at the moment, but I'm not sure it won't happen very soon. So AI will get better. Large language models are just one form of AI, so far mechanistic, driven by computer scientists, and limited to what I call copying. But if it builds algorithms on cognitive psychological models of human thinking and learning, it will become even more powerful. So what are the implications for teaching? Well, biggest worry, of course, is assessment. Students will just ask you put the question into ChatGPT and it will give you an answer. And how will you know the student's not done it or whether it's a machine? Well, as I said, it comes back to what your goals are as a teacher, what you're trying to achieve. Do you just want students to know things, or do you want them to be able to apply them or change things or think creatively or do things differently? So the danger of AI as it stands at the moment, it reinforces existing behavior. It doesn't help you move into the future. And I would look at cheating at exams the same way we looked at calculators. You know, at one time we said we shouldn't allow students to use calculators in school. They've got to learn arithmetic. But now students look up at things, use calculators. We don't say there's anything wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with AI for the students to get the stuff out of the way. This is what we know. Can we move on from there? What's the next step? So what that means is you could be replaced by AI as an instructor if you are delivering content. Because believe me, AI will deliver content a lot quicker, a lot faster, and a lot more accurately than you can. It's what you do with that content and how you want students to use that content that makes you important as an instructor, as a human instructor. So if you can be replaced by AI, you deserve to be. Okay, so that means that focusing teaching then on the higher levels of learning. There's been a lot of talk about soft skills, about getting students to think about ethics, about entrepreneurship, about leadership. These are all the kinds of things that AI is not good at teaching and which you should be good at teaching and bringing that into your curriculum. And that means basing student assessment on original work done by the students. Simple things like tell your own story and relate what you've learned to your story. Get students to draw from their experience and apply what they've learned to their own experience. This is problem-based learning. Lots of models for problem-based learning. This is just one. So again, get students to use AI to help them solve problems. But the AI won't solve problems for you at the moment. I'm not saying it won't, but certainly large language models won't solve problems. It will just tell you what we know about a problem. So I'm going to skip the last two because of time and just draw some conclusions. Digital and distance learning will continue to grow. AI for teaching and learning will be increasingly important in the future, but will replace only those instructors who fail to adapt. Now, this is a huge challenge. How are you, as an ordinary instructor, going to know about all the ins and outs of artificial intelligence? I retired because I didn't want to do it. Now, you haven't got that luxury. That means you need centers for teaching and learning who can focus on this, who can sift out what it can do well and what it can't do well, and work with them. And they need your help because we need to know alternative ways to teach that will lead to those higher level skills, and that's got to come from you. That can't come from the Center for Teaching and Learning. So there's a dual responsibility here. And lastly, I can't emphasize too strongly, pedagogy, the science of teaching and learning, will be increasingly important to exploit new technologies for teaching. Let me say one thing that everybody here should know in a technological university. You bring in a new technology, it's not efficient unless you change the pre-existing processes, right? It's no good just bringing technology to do what you did before because you don't get the full benefits of the new technology. You have to change methods. That applies as much to teaching as it does to anything else that technology is used for. So new technology is not sufficient for effective teaching. Teaching methods will need to change to exploit the new technologies. Understand how AI works. Get this kind of rough understanding that I've got. It's a probabilistic model. That means it does this. You don't have to go into all the algorithms because you're not going to be a consultant in AI. But you do need to have an understanding of how AI works. And that means better training of faculty of instructors in both AI and pedagogy. And good luck, because it's your future, not mine. I'm retired. Thank you.